Welcome back to this awesome May 4th edition of Archaeology After Dark. My name is Daniel Rhodes, and my guest today is Alison Shepherd. Alison, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
As has already been mentioned, my name is Alison Shepherd, and I'm the project manager for the Veterans Curation Program. It's an Army Corps of Engineers funded program that hires veterans to process archaeological collections that are under the stewardship of the Corps of Engineers. So we bring veterans predominantly from Iraq and Afghanistan veterans into the program. We train them. They need no prior experience. We provide all the training, and they process these collections that are under the stewardship of the Corps of Engineers in order to bring them up to federal curation standards as they currently are.
That is a great program, especially from a community standpoint. And that's one reason I invited Allison to talk about it. The other reason is it is Georgia's Archaeology Month. So I wanted to give a shout out to all of our folks who are archaeologists in Georgia who work hard and dig holes.
Definitely. And just to provide a little plug for New South Associates, which is the company that I work for, since it is Georgia Archaeology Month, I think it's the first weekend every May. It'll be this weekend, this Saturday coming up. New South will be having their Archaeology Day event at their headquarters in Stone Mountain. So if you have not heard about that, I encourage you to check out their social media. And if you're in the area, please go and visit because it's always a great time. This year, the theme is built around African American history and culture.
Yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity. So, folks that are in the area, be sure you check that out. So, getting back to the Veterans Curation Program, how did that start as a program?
Hey, so we actually have a pretty long history. I guess the seeds of the program kind of were planted in the 1990s with the passing of the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, as well as the enactment of federal curation standards like 36 CFR Part 79. So, from that point on, federal agencies were required to meet certain standards in terms of how they curated their collections that were generated as a result of public works projects. And then, going along with that, with NAGPRA, they're responsible for ensuring that they maintained inventories and moved forward with repatriation wherever possible. So the Corps of Engineers actually has a mandatory center of expertise for the curation and management of archaeological collections, and that operates out of the St. Louis district in St. Louis for the Corps of Engineers. They are the kind of compliance center, and they do centralized management for all of the Corps of Engineers curation needs. So they do, forensic work, they do curation, um, they handle core compliance with NAGPRA. And so with the enactment of those two kind of laws or standards for curation and also NAGPRA, the Corps of Engineers realized that they kind of had a knowledge gap in terms of what collections were under their purview, under their stewardship. And so they, in the late 90s and early 2000s, did an assessment of all of their collections, and they kind of reached out to all the repositories, museums that they believed to have their materials, and they determined that to try to kind of put the puzzle pieces together and get an idea of the big picture of Corps owned archaeological collections or Corps managed archaeological collections. And it was a huge picture. It was something like well over 140 repositories, to kind of imagine two football fields a foot deep of materials were in their ownership, they realized. Thousands of linear feet of records they were responsible for. And as they did this assessment of these collections, they determined that several of them were in danger of losing their context. So they did not meet the current federal curation standards. And beyond that, the bags were falling apart. Materials were in danger of losing their scientific value. And so that's kind of one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, this, the early 2000s was also a difficult time for our country. We were entering the Iraq and Afghan wars. And the Corps of Engineers, predominantly Sonny Trimble with the Mandatory Center of Expertise, was called to investigate genocide claims, made against Saddam Hussein. And so he traveled over and did the Iraqi mass graves excavations and was responsible for that. And over the course of that work, which took place over a few years, he came into contact with federal contractors and also active members at the time who were talking about the kind of the bleak situation that they faced when they returned home, of chronic unemployment. And I think, that's become pretty widely known that veteran unemployment rate is typically higher than the civilian unemployment rate. And so once that was wrapped up, Sonny and, other people at the Corps of Engineers, they realized that they had all these collections that needed to be brought up to federal curation standards. They also had veterans who needed employment or help finding employment. And so they decided to kind of marry those two missions and, accomplish two things with one pot of money. And so that's where the Veterans Curation Program comes from. We hire the veterans to process those at-risk collections. And so on one hand, we're bringing collections up to the current standards and making them more searchable and accessible for research and repatriation. And on the other hand, we're providing employment assistance and transitional employment to these veterans.
Yeah, and that is from a community and archaeological standpoint, that's a fantastic way to do things. I was just thinking about how the precision that comes along with military type training would be really great, especially for doing field work, because we are required to do so much precise measuring and documentation that it just seems like a seamless transition.
It really is. Veterans are some of the most capable employees, whether that's in the military or the civilian sectors. They are trained to be persistent, and they persevere, and they follow directions very well. They're just the VCP has had great experiences working with veterans in field and lab environments, because we are predominantly or entirely a lab program.
I was just thinking, most veterans, they see the field work we do here in the Southeast. They could probably just shrug it off with how, you know, flippant the West.
Yeah, I think that I don't think you'll find a veteran who isn't used to working outside and, in different kinds of conditions.
So, what kind of projects does the curation program actually work on? Like, what are they working on currently?
Okay. So as I mentioned previously, we deal entirely with what we call legacy collections. So these are archaeological document and artifact collections that were generated, sometimes 30 or 40 years ago, in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. Sometimes even farther back than that. They were generated kind of in the wake of mass public works projects. So to bring an example, to the southeast, the Tennessee Tombigbee Waterway project. Over the course of that project to create the Tenn-Tom Waterway, they surveyed, I think, I don't have it like right at my fingertips, but it was something like hundreds of miles, a 5-mile wide corridor for, over 100 miles, and hundreds of archaeological sites were surveyed and depending on the situation, excavated along that corridor. And so the Augusta lab in Augusta, Georgia, they have the THTP project, which is the Tennessee or Tom Bigby Historic Town Sites Project. So that was one of the many investigations conducted to, prepare for that waterway project. And it's, a 208 box collection that has both prehistoric and historic components from one of 4 historic town sites that were excavated along the river there. There are thousands of years of history, and I think on every shelf in the VCP labs. And I don't think I mentioned this previously, but we have 4 flagship labs across the country. We have one in Alexandria, Virginia, one in Augusta, Georgia, one in St. Louis, Missouri, and then we also have our newest one in San Mateo, California. So we have collections from, or have seen collections from virtually every Corps of Engineers district. We use kind of name codes for our collection. So THTP in Augusta, in Alexandria, they're processing, it's called MU, but it's a historic collection. They've also recently done a Fort Delaware kind of excavation that was done, I think it was in the early 60s or 70s, but it's a historic collection. The Augusta lab has also had prehistoric collections. Basically, anything and everything you can think of has been on a VCP shelf or found in a VCP collection box.
So I know a lot of you are probably asking why I personally think, or just this is important in general, is that if collections like this aren't curated properly, it's at risk of being lost just completely. Like it will disappear if it's not cared for properly.
Absolutely. I think that that's something that's more present on the minds of archaeologists and collections managers in general, that um, it's great to, in the wake of a public works project, for example, when that material is going to be lost, recovering that data for research. But the problem is that oftentimes the research isn't done. So the materials are excavated, a report is generated, it kind of falls into the gray literature black hole, where very few of those reports are ever widely distributed or used. Those collections are put on shelves and then kind of ignored or just forgotten about. And then even if a researcher did want to go in and utilize those collections, part of the problem is that there's no catalog, there's nothing searchable to help the researcher to, get the information they're looking for. And so that's really, another big push within our program, is that we take these collections and we're bringing them up to current federal standards. So we're rehousing everything that needs to be rehoused. But in addition to that, we don't reanalyze collections within our program. These collections, as legacy collections, they've had previous analysis done because a report was generated for them. But we kind of place another layer over top of the existing analysis. So our technicians learn to use our standard material class and artifact descriptions, and they will catalog the collections to create a searchable Excel catalog for these materials. And once a collection is fully processed and finalized, that searchable catalog goes back to the repository with the collection and can be utilized by any researchers who get permission to access the collections.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I know all of you are tired of me harping on the necessity of documentation, but this is the kind of thing that the documentation, do it and do it correctly, please.
Absolutely. I don't know how many times because I started out with this program as the archives manager, 7, 8 years ago now in the Augusta lab. And, part of our, daily struggle was interpreting the notes that go along with these collections, because we deal with the artifacts, but we also process the archives that are associated with these collections. So we're not just making the artifacts themselves accessible with a catalog or really high quality photographs. We're also scanning and assigning, you know, metadata and information to the documents themselves so that they can be utilized in tandem with the artifacts. And um, part of the problem in terms of documentation is not being able to read the notes, inconsistent, field methods in terms of labeling bags or tags, changing the cataloging or analysis methods halfway through the project. We've had anything you can think of, we've had to deal with. And so in some sense, it's kind of archaeology of archaeology, because we're trying to kind of piece together how the original excavation went and how they decided to get the materials out of the ground, and then how they decided to analyze the materials, whether they used, a code, or they use shorthand to describe material classes. We try to pull out as much information as we can to make the collection more usable. And documentation issues really make that difficult.
So one thing, this is just off the top of my head. I know the armed forces don't actually train archaeologists. I assume that the curation program has training to go along with what the veterans who come to work for you actually are looking at.
Absolutely. So we run 2 5-month sessions each year. We hire, we actually just started this current session this past week on Monday, and we'll run until I think September. Count 5 months from there, until September. And then we would hire again in October, and then hire from there. But basically the first whole month of our program is training. So right now in all the VCP labs, our technicians are learning about archaeology and anthropology. We teach them about the basic phases of excavation, or, of archaeological investigation. We teach them how provenience information works. And then, basically it's death by PowerPoint, unfortunately. But then they get their hands in the actual collections, and they learn how to process our collections according to VCP standards, using our material classes and artifact descriptions. And over the course of the program, we've really honed our training methods, because our goal is not to train veterans to be archaeologists. Our goal is to use this work, archaeology and collections management, as kind of a vehicle for imparting other transferable skills. So attention to detail, technical writing, data entry and database management, stuff like that, into skills that they can use in other sectors. So we've had technicians who've had interests in archaeology, sure. And so we do have some technicians that go on to do archaeology or archives or something similar. But the vast majority of our technicians have no interest in archaeology, no prior experience, and yet we, can train them to process these collections according to our standards. And then they move on from the program and get jobs in things like logistics, or dental, dental technicians, or hub supervisors for UPS. So anything you can think of. Our job is to help them kind of get where they want to go. And it doesn't matter if that's not archaeology.
Yeah, and that's what's really great about the skills in this field is even if you don't like archaeology, the skills are transferable to just about anything, really.
Absolutely. Archaeology itself, we steal methods from tons of different fields to do our jobs. It's truly multidisciplinary field. And so, going into that, that's the case. Going out of it is also the case. So that's really what our goal is to do. And another aspect of our program that I hadn't quite mentioned yet is that, I mentioned that we're kind of a transitional employment assistance program. We provide paid professional growth and development time to all of our technicians. So they get paid time each week to work on resumes. We do cover letter workshops. We do LinkedIn workshops. Um, we work kind of individually with each technician and take their goals in mind, and bring in people as necessary to help them get where they want to go, whether that's um, just a job or a career or employment, or in the case of veterans who are seeking, different sorts of services like attaining a VA disability rating, getting into vocational rehabilitation programs through the VA. We really try to become a one-stop shop for everything that they're trying to accomplish.
So what I'm hearing is it's like an all-inclusive program. Like you give them everything they need to transition from whatever it is they're working on with the curation program to something else.
Yes, so we try at the very least to do that. So I'm trying to think of an example. For example, I had a technician who came in several years ago in the Augusta lab who had been an OR nurse in the Army and came out and into our program and had no desire whatsoever to work on in the medical field, after exiting from the military. And we tried to figure out how to parlay the skills that she had and then the skills from the program into another career. And so we helped her pivot, and she actually went on to be a hub supervisor for a UPS facility in Atlanta, and was very happy with that job. And so um, obviously we do everything we can to help the technicians in our program. Obviously too, it takes a lot of work from the technicians. We provide the time and the space and the flexibility, but they put in the work and kind of have the goals, and then we do our best to help them reach those goals.
So another question I have is, I'm assuming you've been with the program before COVID.
Yes.
Did
Yes.
did COVID interrupt the way you guys did things, or did you change the way you did it so you could keep going?
I think that COVID really, as with any industry and any job, I think any business would tell you that they were heavily impacted by COVID, at least initially, because there was a halting period where we're trying to figure out how to deal with this issue, how to move on. There was a period of time where we did not have technicians in the lab, a few months, and our managers were working remotely. We really, I think, for the best, utilized that time to really lock down our standards, revise our methods, and we moved on from there into developing a policy for having technicians and managers in the lab safely, um, and we continued that policy up until just recently, actually. So we learned the best ways to sanitize the lab, maintain distance. We reconfigured our lab spaces, so that people could work safely together. And then we just continued on because, uh, we're a kind of a people facing program. I think, if anything, the biggest impact on our program was that our outreach efforts and our engagement efforts kind of halted, or we had to do them differently. And so in the last year or so, that's been our big push, is to get back out on the streets, get back in front of people with our outreach. And so, that's currently what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and that's one thing that just doing this program I've really taken an interest in is how different programs have responded and reemerged from COVID with their public policy, their community policies, just their policies in general.
Yes. So, previously before COVID, a big part of our program was having guest speakers, archaeologists, or veteran service organizations, community county representatives into our labs to help our technicians to accomplish their goals or to learn more about archaeology. We also went out into the community for field trips and things like that. That all stopped during COVID, and we moved to a more virtual kind of approach where we, did virtual lectures, and we kind of really limited who could come into our spaces. But, um, you know, currently we've pivoted to do kind of a hybrid approach where I think we realize that there is value in, virtual outreach and engagement. And so we're going to continue that, but we're also going to do that, face to face, interaction, and bringing people into our labs, and just also kind of putting our faces back out there again.
So, for veterans who are watching this episode, how can they get in touch with you or the program? What's the best way they can do it?
So the best way, I think, is it depends on kind of where you are. We have a website, veteranscurationprogram.org. We also recently made a big push to have a very strong social media presence. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. I'd say we're most active currently on Facebook and Instagram. We've got very active social media pages, so please check those out and follow our organization. If you are a veteran who is interested in our program, please go to our website. It's very easy to apply through the website. We're currently operating, one of our sessions, but we accept applications on a rolling basis. So we'll just hold your application until the next session. If you're interested in kind of interfacing directly with our labs, every session we have meet and greet events, so open houses where the community members can come into the labs and tour our spaces and kind of learn how our technicians work in the program. Those are coming up mid-July, so please stay tuned on our social media for those. Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to learn more about our program, and I did encourage you to check out our website and our social media, or if you're in the area, just to come to one of our open house events.
Yeah. So my last question is personal. If people wanted to learn more about archaeology here in the Southeast in Georgia, or just any helpful advice you wanted to dish out, what would you recommend?
I think that we've mentioned the word community a lot, and I think that the archaeology in the Southeast is a community, and I think that we're really welcome and open and community. There are archaeological societies, I think, in every state. They have chapters in different towns. So you've got Society for Georgia Archaeology, or SGA. I know that there are similar organizations in Alabama. New South Associates has a great website that you can check out and learn about what they're doing in the community. There are many different ways to volunteer and interact with, in archaeological digs. I know New South Associates takes volunteers within their actual lab space and headquarters. And many of those volunteers have kind of moved on to be interns and then employees with the company. I think that there are so many great ways to kind of utilize the archaeological community in the Southeast. So, look for those volunteer opportunities, look for those internships, volunteer on a dig, or, visit New South Associates this Saturday and come to Archaeology Day. That's a great way to learn about archaeology in the Southeast.
Yeah, I highly recommend any community events that you guys see on Facebook, Instagram. Take the time to go talk to some people that are there. I know the policy growing up was don't talk to strangers, but you can't get involved in things if you don't talk to strangers.
Yeah, I'd say on the whole, we're pretty friendly as a community. So we won't bite, or at least most of us won't bite.
Yeah, I mean, if you get bitten by an archaeologist, just walk it off. It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, Allison, thank you so much for joining us here on Archaeology After Dark. I've really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me. And check out our social media and check out our website.
Absolutely. So, again, be sure you check those things out, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.